5 scores! Rick Vaughn.
We've decided to get ourselves back in the game again with our podcast.
Rick Vaughn, Gary Madden.
Probably the craziest story that you're ever going to hear about hockey.
We're going to be coming back to you on a regular basis.
You are listening to Squid and the Ultimate Leafs Fan.
Hello, Canada and hockey fans of the United States and Newfoundland, and an extra big hello to Canadian servicemen overseas.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 120 of the Squid and Ultimate Leafs Fan Show. I'm Mike Wilson, the Ultimate Leafs Fan. Joining me, as always, my winger, Ricky Squid Vibe. Squid, how's things?
Things are great. Things are fabulous in Leafland, if anybody wants to know.
There's a few. There's
a
a few that do. But we're holding our collective breaths and crossing a lot of fingers and toes and stuff like that to see where it goes from here. So we'll discuss that bridge on our weekly live stream, which we do Wednesday night at 6. So everybody be aware of that. But today, Squid, our guest today was taken in 1978 draft by the Boston Bruins. And when enjoying 11-year pro career, known as an aggressive player who played with some bite, including a stint with the Maple Leafs for a few years. Please, and a ex-teammate of yours, also was in the coaching for a number of years. But so let's please welcome Jeff Brubaker to the show. Jeff, first off, thanks for joining us, and how you keeping?
I'm good, Mike. Mike, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks, Rick.
Great to have you. Now, listen, how you staying busy these days?
Well, we have a group that we're rolling out. Everybody in our group is an ex-pro hockey or an ex-pro athlete. Some guys from the NHL, some guys from the NFL. We've also got some interesting guys from NASCAR. We're called Players Capital Group. We help people buy and sell companies. That's our main function. We do other things, but one of the, to kind of summarize, you might be head of an investment group in New York City. You might be sitting on top of several $1 billion looking to, deploy that capital, looking to buy companies to add to your portfolio. But you're still, for all the money you have, you're still a nameless, faceless suit when it comes to the entrepreneur in Fort Wayne or Shreveport or wherever that you might want to buy that guy's company. Well, you're good luck getting a hold of him. He's busy running the company. But if that guy hears from somebody, that he used to watch playing either pro hockey or, college football or whatever, you're likely to return that call. And that's a currency that we have that, a lot of, like I said, a lot of rich groups, doesn't matter how much money they have, nobody knows their name. So we expedite things, we arrange introductions, we have a pretty robust outreach. We ping business owners all over the country. Have you ever thought about selling? If you are, let us know, because we can put the right deal on the table for you. So
do you look for startup companies or grassroots companies? You guys
No, we work at the other end of the spectrum. Startups really don't interest us, simply because, 99 out of 100 of them fail. And if you're good at picking that 1 out of 100, picking, the next Google or the next, big time
Twitter or anything. Yeah.
Yep. Then you're gonna make a lot of money. But 99 out of 100, startups fail. We look for companies in the $20 to $50 million revenue range.
Yep.
Maybe 120 to 100 million. That's usually our ideal customer. The guy that hires us is a guy that, may have started out 40 years ago with one truck. Doesn't matter the business. He started out with one truck and now he's got 50.
Yep.
And now he wants to slow down. He wants to sell the company. Another typical customer of ours is somebody who's starting to really get traction, but you can't continue to self-finance when you're building a business. You can't keep shelling out. You keep shelling out all that money, and putting it back into the company to grow. Now you've got a $50 million company, but you've never put any money in your pocket. So a guy like that we might help him sell 3/4 of his company to somebody who has money and expertise and the willingness to help him grow. Now that guy stays on for 5 more years, but the chips that he left on the table grow to a sum that are bigger than what he raked off the table. So, but basically, mergers and acquisitions, is what we do, and we're looking for more guys to join us, because most guys don't understand that, and this is something that just kind of dawned on me one day. There are retired professional athletes in North America in every major city, and what that gives us, if we could ever organize ourselves properly, it would take $1 billion to start up an organization that had people with contacts and influence, all over the planet. When we finally get this off the ground the way I want it, then we're going to be very powerful. There's no reason a guy like Rick Vive, who was the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs and, is well known in a lot of places. They probably still remember you in Birmingham, eh, Squid?
Yeah, I would imagine they do. Yeah.
But you have, that's, being, when we retire from the game, you're a guy that's got some interesting stories, and a lot of people remember you, but you don't really, all of a sudden you realize, hey man, I'm on my own. And you got to, if you're lucky enough I was lucky enough to coach for 12, 13 years, but that only prolonged my adolescence. I had to reinvent myself when I was, around 50. That wasn't easy. This is what this is what I came up with, and we're getting ready to put on a major expansion. We're going to recruit you, Rick. You haven't been recruited for a while, but we're going to recruit you, because so many people up in Toronto that have money and people that we could probably help. So
yeah, here's one right here.
Yeah.
Well, I was on Bay Street for 40 years, Jeff, so I know a little bit about this world you're in, but I was on the trading side. But our firm is our firm is known for bringing BlackBerry public, and we financed them from Merchant Bank as Research in Motion right to a public company. So I understand what you're doing. So like the clients that you're going after now, how do you search these companies out? Do you have somebody that just looks for these companies that are at that level, or do they come to you guys?
We subscribe to services that'll give you that information. It's worth it. It's expensive, but it's worth the money, because there's a lot of money at the end of at the end of one of those processes. If you have, a successful deal, I've done several deals that netted me a lot more than I ever made in a single year, in pro hockey.
Yep.
So, put it that way. The average, the average company sells for between 5 and 10 times what it makes in a single year. Okay. So if your company makes $5 million a year, okay, that's a $25 million,
valuation,
which is the commission on that is, it's worth putting in it's worth putting in the work for.
I'd pay you that if I had a company that was that worth making that kind of money. You were getting that kind of return. I would have no problem paying you that money. That's for sure.
Well, we'll start looking for some up at, I know of at least a half a dozen, investment groups in Toronto that are looking hard right now.
Yep.
They're sitting on top of billions of dollars. It's burning a hole in their pocket. If they, but for some reason, those guys are never any good at finding companies to invest in. That's where we come in. We kind of bridge that gap. But anyway, that answers the business question at least.
Well, that we can come back to that. That's a very interesting road you've taken. But let's talk about how you got there. Now, you were born in Frederick, Maryland. People get that wrong. They said you were born somewhere else in Lansing, Michigan, but you weren't. You ended up in
I was born in Hagerstown, Maryland.
Hagerstown.
Okay, but we lived in Frederick. Now,
yeah.
Here's an example. It would be almost like Hagerstown and Frederick would be like maybe the difference between Belleville and Kitchener. Not the biggest towns. But not the smallest ones.
Yeah.
And we lived in Frederick. My father was in the Army.
Yep.
In Frederick, but the hospital was quarantined. So they ran me up when I was ready to, be delivered. They took me to the next town over where I was born, lived the first 2 days of my life, came back to Lansing, came back to Frederick. And then when I was 8 years old, we moved to Lansing. So, but a funny story about that was, the first time I ever played a game in Washington against the Capitals, I was listed as born in Hagerstown, Maryland, and they sent a female reporter down, and I was pretty young. I only got about 4 or 5 shifts the whole fucking night, and but the trainer says there's a reporter wants to talk to you, and I go, what? Why would they want to talk to me? I just sat on the end of the bench most of the night. And she said, hi, I'm with the Hagerstown Dispatch or whatever. How does a boy from Hagerstown make the NHL? And I said, well, ma'am, I'm from Frederick, and Frederick's hospital was quarantined, so they took me over to Hagerstown, and I lived the first day of my life there, and I've never been back. Well, okay, I guess not much of a story here. But then we moved to Michigan when I was 8, took up the game there, and kind of like a lot of other guys, you take a circuitous route. I played just about everywhere you could play. I played college hockey at Michigan State. I played junior hockey in Minnesota. Then I left Michigan State and went to Peterborough. And
well, let's talk about your early years, Jeff. Now there was a story I read about you at a hockey camp or an NHL, because obviously as a young kid, all the sports around you were baseball, basketball, football, and hockey was probably the 4th on the list for a lot of the kids you were growing up with. Maybe not Lansing, but where you came from in Frederick or Hagerstown. But at an NHL camp you went to, a star player from the NHL gave you a little bit of encouragement when he noticed you.
Yeah, you know what? I remember that well. It was in Montreal. I might have been 13 years old, maybe 14. But back then, the players didn't make very much money, and they had to supplement their incomes. They worked at hockey schools. So, when you're a 14-year-old kid and that just never happens anymore. The guys, they don't need the money. They're making millions. NHL players just don't work at hockey schools in the summer anymore, but all of them did back then. And Jacques Lemaire said to me, you are a good player. If you continue to practice, you will play for us someday. And I said, what? Really? And he said, "Oh yeah," and I believed him. You don't. When you're 13 or 14, you don't realize he tells that to every kid in camp. You don't realize when you're being patronized, but I believed him. And so I just kind of, I started stepping it up and playing more and more hockey and less. I mean, I was a pretty good baseball player, but I remember, as in the 6th and 7th grade, I'm one of the best players in the city. By the time I'm in 9th grade, I'm not even a starter. And I go to the coach, what the hell's going, why aren't I in the lineup? He said, Brubaker, you never practice baseball. You're always at these friggin' hockey camps. Okay. You haven't practiced baseball for 3 or 4 years now. Not once. Why do you think that's why you're not in the lineup? All right. Well, that makes sense. At some point I kind of realized there, and that might've been when I crossed off baseball off my, that off one of my potential. All I ever wanted to do was play in the pros. And then I kind of realized I wasn't going to make it in football. I'd had to have been a lot bigger. I was 6'2", 210, and a starting lineman at Michigan State would have been 6'5", 280. And, so yeah. It's right, man, if you're going to play anything, it's probably going to have to be hockey. And that's when I really, that's when I just kind of wrote off all those other sports and, said, all right, well, now you better go get some training. There was a league in Minnesota that was pretty good for an American junior league anyway. Played there a couple of years, got a scholarship to come back to Lansing, Michigan, in Michigan State. And I didn't see that as being a great path to the pros. And the Peterborough Petes had been recruiting me all along. And one day I just said, I called them up and said, "Hey, you still want me?" And they said, "Yep, come on up." And in retrospect, that was a good move, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have, I developed, I was really nowhere. I wasn't even on the map when I got there, but, I mean, the Ontario Hockey League was kind of a wild, wild west. I remember my first day in the league being in a brawl in Hamilton, in the warm-ups. I hadn't even played a shift. And I'm in a brawl. I'm with Al Secord, Tim Coulis, Willie, and we're all in the bottom, and they're all scratching at me and biting me, and and we're poking each other's eyes out, and I'm saying to myself, you walked away from a 4-year scholarship for this? Holy shit.
Now, Jeff, hang on before you go any further. A former teammate of yours, I did a little research with him on you. He told me that story, and didn't that kind of start by they didn't give you guys very many pucks for the warm-up? So one of your pucks actually drifted into their end, and of course you just went down and got it, and then all hell broke loose.
That was some other brawl.
Oh, okay, that's another one.
No,
but the same guys.
No, this is my introduction to the Ontario Hockey Association. Okay, my first game with the Peterborough Petes, we get on the bus and we go down to Hamilton, and Hamilton had a real goon squad, and as you're skating around in warm-ups. So my first tour around, I'm looking at a guy named Tim Coulis. Yeah, and he's looking at me. And the second time we come around, now Coulis and Secord are looking at me. And the third time around, they just flew at me. They just attacked me. Like gloves off. And, and now it's a 45-minute brawl on the bottom. And I'm on the bottom, underneath, I don't know, 20 guys and we're kicking and spitting and biting and I'm going, what the am I doing here? And the cops came out and finally pulled everyone off the ice. So I remember well, we could only get 2 guys to stand on the blue line during the I'll never forget this. Hamilton had 5 guys on the blue line during the national anthem, and we only had 2, me and one other guy. And our coach finally pushed 2 or 3 guys across, and luckily, nothing else happened. We lost that game, but that incident that you're talking about,
that
went on.
That was in the finals.
The phony puck. You took our puck, so we're going to take one of your pucks. Yeah, that was. I vaguely recall that.
Well, Billy Gardner told me that story, and he said the thing about Brew, he wasn't as scared of anybody, and he just loved that story. He also made a comment about your van, some van you had, and you know this one, Squid? He said it was like a house for you.
It was. I drove it all. I practically lived in it in the summer. I'd go here and I'd go there, and those stories are probably a little overblown, but it was a fun way to hang out and travel when, my early 20s. Just a mobile hotel.
Jeff, I want to get your opinion on, you talked about playing baseball, other sports. I've always said that if I got 2 kids and one guy's this good at hockey and the other guy's this good, but he's a real good athlete, I can probably make this guy a better hockey player than the other guy. Would you agree with that?
Well, a couple of things. I think it's really good for a young guy, a 10-year-old, 12-year-old guy, to play more than one sport. And even Wayne Gretzky will tell you that. He said, Wayne played baseball in the summer, and he said, I really improved my hand-eye coordination, by being a multi-sport athlete, but, you could, it's just a matter of how hard you want to make that baseball player work. You're saying if you could make a baseball player probably a better hockey player just because he's a good athlete, I guess I'd agree with that if that's what if I understood you correctly.
Yeah, because I'll give you a good example. Like Justin, my youngest boy, who's playing in Cincinnati, he's played almost 300 American League games, 700 pro games. But at 14, he was probably the best baseball player in the Toronto area at 6'6", and could throw a ball 80 miles an hour at 14 years old. So he's recruited by one of those elite programs in Southern Ontario. And because I said, well, when do you guys get started? They said, we have about 5 indoor practices in March. Then we get going in April. And I said, well, okay, fine. I said, my son's hockey ends the end of March. He may miss a couple of the indoor practices, but when hockey starts in August, he will miss those for baseball. And the guy said, no. And I said, what do you mean no? He said, it's got to be 100% commitment. I said, well, that pretty much is. So he ends up with 8 scholarship offers for hockey. And I think if he had gone to that baseball program, because they went to the States a lot, I bet you he would have had 20 or more for baseball. So that gives him a lot more options, right? And unfortunately, it didn't work out.
I'm just talking about that, like that 9 and 10-year-old boys. They ought to be playing everything.
Yeah.
I don't think you should be specializing in anything at 9 years old.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because there's too much like common in strategy. A lot of things. There's a lot of crossover between strategies in baseball, football, hockey, and, basketball even, to make you, to learn those strategies that revolve around like the fundamentals, like quickness and, quick decision making, et cetera. That I think, that's why I think it helps, like maybe when you're 12 or 14, then I think, that's when you specialize.
Yeah. Well, kids are late bloomers. They grow late, all that kind of stuff, so all those things have to be factored in between sort of 11 and 18, even, if you will. But you're right. They should be playing more than one sport, and it's good for their hand-eye coordination and agility and balance and all those things. Yeah. But just before we move on, I just wanted to say to you, just want to add to the van story that you're not alone in that, because we had Jeremy Roenick on one day, and he told us a story about driving along to the airport one day with Wayne Van Dorp. And there was a guy driving beside him, an old beat-up van that they had for sale. So they waved the guy and pulled him over, and Wayne bought it at the side of the road and drove it for about 3 or 4 years.
They're handy.
So that was it. So where I was going to go with your next question with you is a couple of things. First off, you're obviously a big kid. You had an aggressive part to your game. I believe that it was Gary Green told you that if you're going to make it in the National Hockey League, you had to step it up and believe more. You're not going to make it on the skill side scoring goals, because lots of guys can do that. So you're going to have to distinguish and separate yourself. When did that part, is that when you really realize this is what I have to do, separate myself from the pack to actually really make it?
Well, I remember that well. I was in my last year with the Petes, and, we're going into maybe the last half of the season, and we're on, a road trip, and Gary was calling everybody up, to the front of the bus for a quick, a 10-minute conversation, about, what are your aspirations, et cetera, and he just laid it out for me. He just said, "Hey, look, Jeff, you're not going to make it. I don't want to see you get pigeonholed as a, if you're going to get to the bigs, you're going to have to scrap your way into the league. And, that doesn't mean you can't play and can't, continue to develop your skills. But that's what's, if anything's going to get you there, that's going to be it. If not, then, you'll probably get buried in the minors." And so I asked
been a singer though. You could have been a musician, because when you sang "House of the Rising Sun" at one of our, I think it was at the barn party we had.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never heard anybody singing as good as you.
Well, you know what? I always, you know what? I had like 2 go-to songs that I could sing. After those 2, I was done.
Well, your last year junior,
that was one heck of a performance. I can tell you that. It was
with no music, by the way. Squid, was that just a solo?
No. There was music.
No. I had the Good Brothers behind me.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that's a real band.
Remember the Good Brothers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you, Squid? You hired them to play that barn dance, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I got to tell you, I've never heard anybody sing that song as good as him since. And I thought it was unbelievable.
Well, like I said, the key is to just have, if you're going to get invited up to sing with a band, especially like the Good Brothers, you're not going up there to sing 10, right? They're going to let you come up and sing 1, and then, hey, get the hell out of here, right? Just it doesn't take a lot of talent to have 1 or 2 good go-to songs.
Well, speaking of your talent, your last year in junior, you actually put up some pretty good numbers: 20 goals, 24 assists, 307 minutes and penalties. When did you start hearing from some teams and the possibility you may get drafted? Now, the draft, as we know, that was right around Squid's era too. It was a little different than it is today. So what was all going on?
Well, you had to be 20 back then to be drafted.
Mm-hmm.
Or you finish your 19-year-old year, and then you're eligible. But we had a good long playoff run, and we beat several teams that nobody expected us to touch, especially the Ottawa 67s, who had Bobby Smith and Tim Higgins and 7 or 8 other guys that, went on to play in the show.
Doug Wilson.
Yep. A bunch. Yeah. They were loaded. I think Dougie Wilson was gone by then, but they were loaded. And I think that impressed a lot of scouts. We handled them, and we went in there. I think we won 3 games in Ottawa, and I know the scouts were, and I had a pretty good series, so that, I wasn't really even on the radar until the playoffs of my final year in junior. Then we lost the Memorial Cup in the final game. So that it was that long playoff run that put me on the map.
Well, who was speaking to you at that time? Any teams approach you?
Well, nobody was talking to me directly. I hired an agent. I wish I hadn't. Now I would have, for as much as, the guy did for me, I could have done it myself. And I should have never, I signed with New England in the WHA. I should have never done that. I should have gone straight to the NHL draft. Just because, that wasn't, the New England Whalers at that time was not we played against Rick that year.
Yep.
Pretty sure, right? You were down there with Dave Birmingham. And
78, 79.
Played for Brof.
Yep.
Yep. Which, that's 1,000 stories alone right there.
Oh yeah.
But I would have been a whole lot better off if I'd waited for the NHL draft, and started working my way up for there, because the Whalers just weren't. They were not a well-run organization at the time. They had, they knew they were going to the NHL, but they had Gordie Howe, who was 51 at the time. They had Dave Keon. They had Johnny McKenzie. We had a 51-year-old and 2 40-year-olds, and you're trying to build for a future, run in the NHL. So, I can't believe how, they did not. I remember that year they did not own one bicycle. There was no gym. There was no practice. Practices would last about an hour, and they were real easy. They weren't tough. I expected everything to be so much, I wish I had been, I wish I had, and then 3 years later, I go in the waiver draft to Montreal. What a culture shock that was. After my first, I almost threw up my first practice. It was just so, seriously, those practices were so tough. And then you get off the ice and, I'm getting undressed, and then they're going, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm getting dressed." I'm going, "No, you got to, everybody rides the bike for 30 minutes, after practice." It was just completely, I wish I had started my career in that organization. I'd have developed a lot quicker, a lot faster.
Well, yeah, you would for sure. You would for sure, because Montreal in those days, you did what you were told to do or you were gone. And I still think to this day, probably the best run organization, I think, in pro hockey, maybe even pro sports.
No question about it. And, I kind of always kept and there were a couple of guys. I had a lot of success for a long time in the East Coast League, in the IHL coaching. And I learned, from the 2 guys that taught me a lot. Somehow I met these guys real early in my coaching career, and they taught me, they would talk to me about how they scouted players. One of them was Claude Ruel, and one of them was Eric Taylor. And these guys were just, I mean, Claude Ruel, I remember he would go to the Minnesota high school hockey tournament where they'd have 4 games in a row. Claude wouldn't leave his seat, and he'd hire kids to go get me a hot dog, go get me a coffee. And he's sitting there with his little program writing 4 straight games. And then early in my coaching career, how, no matter where you're coaching, whether it's in the big leagues or in the minors, you go to the draft every year, right? You must have gone to several of them, back when you were coaching, and I'd talk to these grizzled old scouts. Those guys they taught me how to scout and how to, and how to identify talent. But they were just, their work ethics were just incredible. And then I'd see other guys from weak organizations when I was in a building, where they were, their scouts would always leave 10 minutes early, or they'd leave after the second period, right? The same teams that were losing their asses off had scouts that just didn't give a shit and were, making a paycheck, and were probably hired because their GM was the buddy. So I learned that, there's a lot of organizations, the biggest problems they ever had, we're talking over the last 20, 30, 40 years, are, GMs that hired their buddies and didn't hire, guys that really, really wanted to do the job.
Well, let me ask you this, Jeff. I'll ask Squid, you can answer this one too. When you're scouting players, outside of the obvious thing being talent, what's the number one thing you learned to look for in a player?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the first things I did when I retired was I took a week-long online psychology course. Then I bought 5 books, 3 on general psychology and 2 on sports psychology. So my communication skills were off the charts when I started coaching. And when I talked to a kid that I was looking at and trying to recruit, I knew exactly how to talk to him and ask him the proper questions to get the proper answers that I wanted. And I could figure that out in 10 minutes, whether or not I thought that kid was going to fit in my program or not.
Perfect.
Yeah.
How about you, Jeff?
Well, I would agree with what Rick just said. But as far as like, what would I look for on the ice? It would, for me, the key was to be prepared in advance. I got real good with computers, and I'd figure out ways to rate guys, and then I'd know exactly, I could eliminate guys, before the game started. I knew at least, half the guys I had already eliminated, just because, their stats would tell you they're probably not going to be good enough. If you only scored 3 goals, playing for London last year, you're probably not even going to be, able to play for our club. But, then, when you're getting to look at a player, there's just something you would call presence. This guy has presence or not. He's making things happen. You don't, you can score 2 goals in a night and come up with, have a great game, even though you're only a 6-goal scorer. I'm just looking at who's catching my eye the most, who's making me. I would put little check marks next to him, and every time somebody did something good, I'd put a check mark, or I'd put a minus, and then invariably, that guy that got 6 check marks was a 30 goal scorer, and that guy that got 1 check mark and 3 minuses, was an average player. So, it was, to me, it was a combination. If you scored, I would recruit over stats. Stats meant everything to me, just simply because, if you can score 35 goals in the OHL, I know you can play, for my team, in the East Coast League or the IHL. You've scored, you've done it. And if you haven't scored much, that means you're probably just not that good. You might look good tonight, but your history tells me you're not a producer. So
yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me was character. And I would talk to them, like I go to the Memorial Cup every year, scout the Memorial Cup. Then I go to like Rochester's camp and see guys that are there on tryouts and so on that might come and play for me in the ECHL. But I wanted guys with character. And I think that was one of my biggest things was, you had to be a good player, but character to me was more important than, scoring 50 goals or whatever. So I based a lot of my decisions on the character. Yeah, knowing that player was going to go out and give 100% every single night. Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to judge a guy's character. But if you're in the East Coast League, you're going to have to accept a few things. You're going to, guys down there, the guy can score 40 a year for you, but he's going to, he's going to drink a lot, or he maybe, well, am I willing to put up with that? Hey, I was no saint, and when you're young, you can run pretty hard at night and still play good the next day. But I think what Rick's talking about is, you try to get rid of those guys that were cancerous to the team. Mm-hmm. If you were a cancer to that team, I don't care how much you could, I don't care how good you were, I'd trade you to, I'd trade the guy to get, and I'd take a guy that was maybe not quite as good, but he showed up every night and, always, backed up his teammates, et cetera. And, the guy was in shape, he's in shape. And, a lot of times, man, in the minors, a lot of times you get down to, you can have an 18-man squad and the next night you're playing with 12 men. Right. Yeah. So you got to have some guys. I always had guys that could play double shifts I would always have several guys that I knew were in damn good shape. So if we got down to 12, 13 guys, I could play them 50 minutes, and but that's, to me, if you're the kind of guy you keep yourself in shape and you work hard at the game, even if you're only playing in the coast, but that's character,
Yeah.
That's one of the character issues, that I think you're talking about, Rick.
Well, I think the other thing, not to put words in.
I'll give you a good example.
Go ahead, Squid.
The year we won the championship in Charleston, my best defenseman, offensive defenseman, was Scott Boston. Okay, and he was a fan favorite and everything. I traded him to Louisville for Chris Rowland. Okay, because I knew Rick Aduno was my assistant coach. He knew Chris from Thunder Bay. He knew his character, the way he played, and that's what we needed going into the playoffs was a guy like that. So I traded my best defenseman for a guy with character who could kill penalties. He could fight. He could do anything. And then I ended up getting this kid from Raleigh, little defenseman who ran our power play better than Scott Boston did. And I gave up nothing to get this guy. The coach there hated him. and I didn't have to give up much to get him. And he ended up, anchoring our power play, and then the playoffs that year, we won the championship. Our power play was 34%, I think, and he was a big part of it.
Yep.
Well, I think the other thing you guys are pointing out, you guys are sort of, I think where you're kind of going is, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I mean with character, it's that player that, as you mentioned, Brew, these guys, they're going to go out and have a few beers, and the coaches aren't stupid. They know when guys were out because they were doing it themselves. But it's that guy who's going to show up at practice next day and be the hardest worker on the ice. He's going to show up at the game and be the hardest worker during the game, be a great teammate, and not embarrass the coach that way, and work for him. And then everybody is on the same page, and it just moves things along.
Yeah, I remember a situation just like that. You can call it character, you can call it leadership. And, as you know, like you said, the guys they're going to go out and have a few beers. But I remember the year, I didn't learn this until after the season, but the leaders on my team, actually every night before a game, there was a mandatory, you had to go to the bar. But it was actually a strip joint that one of our season ticket holders owned. But during the playoffs, it was you can have 2 beers, and at 11 o'clock you got to go home. And so 2 beers isn't going to, and they generated a lot of camaraderie. At the same time, they had a lot of discipline because hey, a couple of beers, go home at 11 o'clock at night. You're going to be ready to, you're not going to be hungover. That's for sure. So that,
Gosh, what? We never went to any strip joints, did we, Brew?
I did. The players did.
No, I meant when we were playing.
Well, along those lines,
foot in Chez Paris once.
Well, you've touched on it. Well, along those lines, how about talk about your time in Toronto, Brew? What was that? How was that? And how'd that come about?
Well, I had played for John Brophy, and John was the assistant coach, and I think he, had a hand in that. And I was in Edmonton.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a couple of knockdown, drag-out fights with my old buddy Dave Semenko, which I did very well in. And the Leafs, I think the Leafs were, so they drafted me in the waiver draft. The Leafs at that time were, we had a lot of talent. I don't know why. I don't know why we didn't, win more. But it was, we didn't win a lot of games, but it was playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs is, it's just a great experience. It's number one hockey town, or one of the top hockey markets in the world. To play in that city, is it's nothing but fun. The tradition and everything. Rick was our captain. Let's see. I loved every minute of it. I would have loved it a lot more if we'd have won more games. I think we were good enough. We had enough talent to win more games. One thing that was strange, we had, if you remember, Rick, we had 2 rookie goalies. That didn't make that right there might have been a big.
Yep.
We had Ken Reggett and Al Bester. Nothing against those guys, but you don't have 2. You don't start an NHL season with 2 guys just out of junior hockey.
No. Well, one other year we had 3 rookie defensemen, 18-year-olds. Jim Benning, Boyne.
Yeah, you did. Okay.
When I look back at those years in Toronto, I put a lot of the the blame on Harold Ballard, who would not pay money for a good general manager or a good coach. And I think that's what it came down to.
Yeah, well, I don't think we were, I'll agree with you. I thought Jerry McNamara was a better GM than Dan Maloney was a coach. But
yeah, but he was the guy that brought in 3 18-year-old defensemen who were, Gary Nyland, for instance, was physically ready to play, but not mentally. Jim Benning was not mentally or physically ready to play at 18 years old. Going back to junior for another year or two.
Al Iafredi, same thing.
Yeah, Al admits it himself. He says, if I had gone back to Belleville, I would have became a better defenseman earlier than when I did.
Yep. So anyway, it was, it was a great experience. Halfway through my second year there, they sent me to Edmonton. I played 4 of the better games I've ever played, and then I broke my ankle. So, that was the year that Steve Smith shot the puck in his own net.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, people had. Yeah, I played for the Oilers. They won 4 games. They won 4 cups in 5 years, and I played for them the year they didn't win it.
Well, you also got to play with 2 of the most iconic sports figures in history. Gordie Howe, one of them, and Wayne Gretzky, the other. What do you take away from playing with those 2, besides the fact Gordie was 51, as you mentioned? But what is it about those 2 that kind of separated themselves from everybody else?
I'll tell you a few stories that kind of summarize, how I felt about them. I played with Gordie in my rookie year, and we were in Cincinnati. And my dad came down from Lansing, Michigan, to catch me in one of my first pro games. So we're in the lobby, and I'm about to introduce my dad to Gordie Howe. Dad, come on over here. I want you to meet Gordie Howe. And Gordie, he's a very gracious guy. But this is a great story. He, hi, Mr. Brubaker, nice to meet you. And, hey, you know what? I just was talking, shake my hand. And so my dad shake my hand again. And so my dad sticks his hand out just like this. And then Gordie says, you've ever had one of those assholes that tries to show you how tough they are when they shake your hand, and Dad goes, yeah, well, I guess so. Kind of. Gordie goes, they go like they shake. He goes, shake my hand real hard. So Dad bears down on him, and Gordie sticks his finger into my dad's fist and starts grinding it. Next thing you know, Dad's like going, ah! He's screaming, and he's like on his knees screaming. Well, and Gordie lets him up. Now, he didn't just say, hi, Mr. Brubaker, nice to meet you. Glad to have your son on the team. He gave my dad a story that he was able to repeat for years. My dad got more mileage out of that story, So, and I think that's kind of why Gordie he would do stuff like that.
That's great.
He'd kind of with a lasting, for a young kid, a pro hockey player's father, to be able to tell that story all over, with all his friends, that was, kind of a gift. It was strange, but, that was Gordie. And when I got to Edmonton, I tell this story a lot. I actually flew in the night the next morning they tell you, all right, you're off to Edmonton. And I'm on a plane from Toronto to Edmonton with Billy Carroll from the Islanders, who had just been traded as well. So Billy and I are, I get on the plane in Edmonton. Billy's already on it. Billy, what are you doing? Well, Edmonton, me too. So we get off the plane in Edmonton. We go down to the rink. We have our first practice. And then the trainer says, Wayne wants to see you too. And we go over, hey, Wayne, and he just throws us the keys to a Mercedes and says, here, drive this while we, until we can get your car shipped out there for you. That's Wayne Gretzky. So we had the use of a Mercedes. He probably won it, in some all-star game or something.
But still,
he probably kept it around just for that purpose. But that was Wayne for you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Squid, anything anything you can talk about besides Gordy knocking you out?
Well, yeah, that was when I was in Birmingham. I remember I used to play center all the way up until junior. So Brof would have me take the face-offs on the right side in our end if it was an important draw. So we're up one on Hartford, and I take the draw, win the draw. Our defenseman shoots it off the glass. I beat the guy down the ice to erase the icing, get the puck. I'm going around the net, and I turn backwards to shoot it in the empty net because they had pulled the goalie. Next thing I know, I'm on the ice. I try to get up. I'm falling down, and then I'm crawling to the bench. And it wasn't until the next day I looked at the film, and when I was turned around, Gordy was back checking, and when he got right beside me, he just went like this. The elbow caught me in the back of the head. I flipped. I was pretty much almost knocked out. And so that was my Gordy House story. And but then years later, I took my son to a game in Detroit, and because he was a big Yzerman fan. And Gordy was there, and we met him in the corridor in the rink, and he started talking to my son. He said, "So you want to be a hockey player?" He goes, "Yeah, I do." And he starts telling them what he needs to do and all that. And I was like, "Holy cow!" Like, he took the time to stop and talk to my son and tell him what he needed to do in order to play pro hockey. I thought that was unbelievable.
Pretty nice.
Yeah.
Bruby, just a couple of minutes here before we let you go. I want to thank you for your time. Throughout your career playing pro and all your pro years, that guy or those guys who carried themselves that you looked at that were really carried themselves the right way on the ice and off the ice, and today they call them a good pro, and actually being a coach, you would have probably spotted guys like this too. Any come to mind immediately?
Let's see. Immediately. Rick Vive, he was the consummate pro, the consummate leader,
would go for a beer.
He's very moderate in his, he'd have one. Rick would have one just because he didn't want to, embarrass guys, so he'd have one just to be sociable, but, no, you know what? I met. Nobody comes to mind immediately, just because, most guys, very few guys, on the good teams. I played everybody. Every team I every team I ever played on was either I'm either like a fourth or fifth line guy on the really best teams. When I was with Montreal, they were very good. When I was with Edmonton, and those teams, were packed with leaders. Everybody was a leader. Mm-hmm. On those Montreal teams, guys like Mario Tremblay, Doug Risebrough, those middle type. I mean, Larry Robinson, all the guys were all leaders. And on the bad teams I was on, there were no leaders, or there were, the leaders were more destructive than they were valuable to the team. They caused more, they might have been good hockey players, but they didn't promote a culture of winning and hard work and dedication. If you were, they would make fun of you, if you wanted to get better. I saw a lot of non-leaders.
Fair enough.
A lot of destructive guys that didn't add anything to the team culture, didn't really help. And when you in an NHL team, when you have like a bunch of 28 and 29, 30-year-old guys that are really helping and showing the way to the 21, 22, 23-year-old guys, show this is what it means to be a pro. The good teams, that's why they were good. They had guys like that. And I remember being on bad teams that had tons of talent, but no leadership or destructive leadership. And, I'm thinking that's probably why those teams didn't win. And you can't really, I don't think you can really put a price on, on good veteran leadership, because they're the guy, those are the guys. It's that 28, 29-year-old, 31-year-old guy that really, makes that 21, 22-year-old guy who's got those young wheels, et cetera. To me, there's nothing more dangerous in the NHL than a rookie at the end of his rookie year. He's got a whole year behind him, and now he's ready to, now he's ready for the playoffs. And if he's been, helped along by, the veterans on his team, then he's going to be pretty dangerous. And if he hasn't, then he's going to be tentative, and he's going to be, when those older guys can really help those younger guys play with confidence, that's the winning culture.
Well, that's why I go back to Montreal. When you look at Montreal, other than maybe Guy Lafleur, everybody that they drafted played in the minors before they made Montreal.
That's for sure. Yep.
And when they got there, they were dragged into that culture in Montreal. And, after 4 or 5 years of playing there, they became the leadership group. And that's why Montreal was so great for all those years, was because they made you go to the minors and earn your damn way to the Montreal Canadiens.
Yep.
And you had no choice.
Well, it's the way things were done. Dan Daoud came on this show, and he told us when he's in Montreal, he wasn't playing very much. He was traveling with the team, and he went out west, and he got traded to Toronto. And after the game, he was ready to pack his bag and head out the next morning or whenever he was going to go. And it was Larry Robinson or Gainey or a few of the guys said, come on, we're going out. And they're going out. Yeah, we're going to take you out for dinner for your last night with us. And all the veterans and everybody took him out for dinner. And it was just so blown away by this gesture. He just, he said, man, oh man, this is how the game, this is the type of team you want to play for.
Yeah.
And I read a story about Mark Messier once that when he was hurt one time and didn't play, a young kid got called up and replaced him, scored a goal. When the kid got back to his hotel room, there's a bottle of Dom Perignon there from Mass. Congratulations on your first goal. I mean, that's leadership. Wouldn't you guys agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. Now, if a kid come into Toronto when I was the captain and scored his first goal, I couldn't afford a bottle of Dom Perignon. So,
oh, by the way, that wasn't a shot at you, Squid. By the way,
but I'd take him out. I'd take him out for a beer and buy him dinner or something. Yeah. No, I mean, those are the things. When you're a captain, you got to do those little things, and especially when those young kids come in, you got to kind of do whatever you need to do in order to make them feel comfortable, for starters, and then help them on their journey to be a regular NHL player.
Yep. So, any final comments, Jeff, before we let you go?
Well, no, I sure do appreciate it.
There is a place in New Orleans. I'd love to hear that one more time.
Well, call the Good Brothers and get me a plane ticket. We'll make it happen.
Yes, that'd be worth seeing.
Hey,
Definitely, we can do a video on that.
Are the Good Brothers still around Toronto?
I'm not quite sure.
I don't know. I haven't heard about them for so long that they may not be alive. I don't know. I mean,
Probably not.
Yeah,
They'd be old. They'd be pretty old by now. They'd be.
Yeah, they would be. Yeah,
they'd be 70s at least.
Yeah.
Well, we're all
a little
getting
older
up
than
there
me,
tough, guys. Well, Jeff, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it. Some great stories, great insights. Good luck with your future endeavors in the capital market business. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'll look you guys up next time I'm up in TO.
That'd be great. Definitely.
I still have a lot of friends in Peterborough too. I go up to Peterborough a lot.
Absolutely.
I saw Bobby McGill in Peterborough a few months ago. He's doing well.
Absolutely.
Was Steve Larmer with you in Peterborough?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. He's still.
There's one guy that every year when they talk about who's going into the Hall of Fame, I can't believe that his name is never mentioned. The guy was over a point a game. He won the Calder as a Rookie of the Year in the National Hockey League, and his name never even gets mentioned. It just baffles me. And I played with him. He was one of the best two-way forwards, I think, in the game. But, I mean, that's the way it goes, I guess.
Yep.
Well, guys, good talking to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, Bruce. Thanks a lot,
Look
pal.
us up when you come into Toronto. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Bruce. Okay, bye-bye.